Let's start. Sorry? Yeah, sure. So, we're going to start a new chapter today, a new parak. We're just still in the same section that we're doing, but it's parak Chaf, the 20th chapter, not an easy chapter actually. Well known. Chaf and Chaf Aleph, 20 and 21, they're a bit more deep and complicated. But let me give you a bit of an introduction. So, this parak follows on from the previous two chapters, 18 and 19, Yitches and Yites, where the Alter Rebbe wanted to explain further this idea that the Tanya is based on the pasuk of Ki Korov, right? That the Torah is accessible to us. We can do it. We can overcome our Yetzer Hara, Nefesh Abamis, animal soul, and we can keep Torah, we learn Torah, keep mitzvahs, and so on. And Ki Korov means it's near to us, it's accessible to us, it's easy, not easy, but like it's doable, very doable. And that pasuk includes, you'll remember the phrase Levavcha. I think you're a little bit too far. Sorry? It's page 50. You see Perek Chaf, they say. Includes Levavcha. Levavcha means even in our heart, even the way we feel, it's all accessible to be filled with love of Hashem and to therefore control our thought, speech, and action, and so on and so forth, right? So he started explaining that we all have an intrinsic, natural love of Hashem, which you call the Ahava Mesoteres, the hidden love. We did this at length. And this hidden love is inherited from Avraham Avinu, who bequeathed to us his neshama. The neshama was coming from the beginning of Atzilus, but then even lower neshamas, they're all linked and all right? So there, deep down, we have this Ahava Mesoteres, which he explained is what we call the Chochmah of the Nefesh. The Chochmah of the neshama, which is the deep instinct, the deep spark within our neshama that's ready to give up its existence for Hashem. Right? That part of the neshama was compared to a candle, just like a candle flickers upwards because it wants to become part of the original foundational fire, even if it means becoming not an entity. So too, the bittul, the self-nullification, the self-surrender at the core of the neshama is complete, and therefore it wants to be completely one with Hashem and only give itself up, not even to exist as an independent reality, but to be part of Hashem's existence. Now, he explained, right, that generally speaking, when does this hidden love come out? When a person is challenged with Avodah Zarah, right? That was the idea. Challenged with Avodah Zarah, challenged with idol worship. Yeah? In other words, when there's a test, a person is given a test, and the test is, jump into the fire or serve an idol, whatever the case is, right? Suddenly, the very, very basis of emunah is challenged, and what happens is, a yid at the very core, that chochmah, mesoteres, that ava mesoteres, that hidden love, that chochmah shebenefesh, he talked about is the part of the neshama that just cannot be separate from Hashem, totally bottled to Hashem, and therefore what happens is that is called out, it's ignited when a person is faced with a dilemma that if he would fail, it would clearly separate him from Hashem. Right? There's no ambiguity there. In other words, it would be clearly separated from Hashem, because everyone understands that serving Avodah Zarah means you're going against Hashem, you're separating yourself from Hashem, you're cutting yourself off from Hashem. And therefore, we found throughout all the ages that even though that hidden love is hidden, but nevertheless it comes to the fore when a person is faced with Avodah Zarah, and therefore the person is ready to be Moisel Nefesh. Right? And that's what we all have. Now, the problem is, which you didn't explain yet, he explained what it is. The problem is that the stage 2, meaning it normally only comes out when we're faced with Avodah Zarah. Or Mesiras Nefesh, right? The Mesiras Nefesh is ignited when we're faced with complete cutting off from Hashem. It doesn't seem to come out on a regular day, right? We're just faced with a regular thing. I don't know, we're going to talk nonsense or Lashon Hara or we eat something we shouldn't eat, or whatever the case is, it doesn't seem to work then, right? It's not felt then. Which therefore begs the question, how does it answer the question? In other words, what does this Ava Masateres, what does this hidden love have to do with making the Torah very relevant and accessible to us? Yeah, it makes the prohibition of Avodah Zarah very accessible. So we understand that if a person will be faced with a real Avodah Zarah question, it will be a no-brainer. Yeah, of course, you're going to just jump into the fire, you give up your life. You're not going to do Avodah Zarah under any cost, right? Because when that happens, the hidden love, the chokhmah of the nefesh, is ignited, right? But what would it have to do with a regular mitzvah? How does it answer the question with regard to regular mitzvahs? So the next 6 chapters, right? And the 6 chapters divided into different parts, we'll soon see. The Alter Rebbe comes and explains a very amazing inyan, and that is that he's going to explain that the violation of any mitzvah, really, the violation of any mitzvah, at some level, even a mitzvah derabbanan, is blemishes and damages the emunah in Hashem, and it's like Avodah Zarah, right? So if we can get to the space where every mitzvah is like Avodah Zarah, every mitzvah is like emunah, every mitzvah we do is like emunah in Hashem, every mitzvah we don't do is like Avodah Zarah, then we can understand how that Ava Masateres, that hidden love, can help withstand the test. Right? You see the link? Yeah. In other words, what that really means in practice is this. When we faced, if we learn a lot of this concept, and we learn Tanya, we learn the Sadir, Chassidus, and we internalize it, and every time we're faced with a test, no matter what the test is, it can mean something much more subtle. It can mean even an Isur Derabanan, or a Mitzvah Derabanan, right? We have to be mizboin, we have to reflect and understand and internalize and come to the realization that this is like Avodah Zarah. And therefore, I should have a serious nefesh. Right? That's the logic here. And that thinking and that process would then make the entire Torah will become accessible and come close to us and attainable and reachable. Right? Obviously, this doesn't happen in 5 minutes, and it doesn't just happen to everyone all the time. But it's a mindset, and it's a mindset then we'll be able to make it easier for us to progress and serve Hashem and overcome temptation and challenges, right? Okay. Now, part of that explanation will take place in Perek Chof and Chof Aleph, chapters 20 and 21. And then from the concepts he's going to explain in chapters 20 and 21, he will then extrapolate and extend this idea to things that he's going to talk about in 22, 23, 24, and 25. Okay? So that's the thing. All right. Sorry? Long journey. Exactly. That's funny. Yes, that's okay. So, it says like this. He starts with, where does Avodah Zarah come from? He says like this. Perek Chof, chapter 20, page 50. One should be clear, right? Like everyone knows. Ki mitzvahs ve'azhoras avodah zarah. The mitzvah to believe in the oneness of Hashem and the warning against avodah zarah. Shehem shnei dibros harishonim, which are the first 2 commandments of the 10 commandments. Anochi v'lo yiyelecha, right? Anochi and lo yiyelecha, which means I am Hashem your God. That's the first one of the 10 commandments. And the second one is, you shall not have any other gods. We know that heim klolus kol haTorah kula. In these 2 commandments, the whole Torah is encapsulated. Right? What does that mean? In other words, like this. On the one hand, you can say it's the foundation of the whole Torah. Obviously, foundation of the whole Torah, that you believe in Hashem, and that's a mitzvah, like the Rabbi says. I think it is. One of them. He says that obviously, yeah, Rabbi. So the Rabbi says that obviously you can't have a mitzvah before you have something you're believing in, right? In fact, this goes to a discussion about the Rabbi is emunah, is believing in one God actually a mitzvah or not? The Rabbi claims it's actually not a mitzvah. Part of it is a mitzvah, but actually at this base it's not a mitzvah, because a mitzvah assumes already someone is a commander before you have a commandment. So you first have to believe in the commander, then you can have commandments, right? That's why he says you can't really say that Amun is a mitzvah, because Amun can't be a commandment. You have to first establish it as a commander, right? Okay. So therefore, you can say that right? You can say that Amunah is the foundation of all mitzvahs. He says more than that. When we say it's the entire Torah, right? We don't mean just this foundation of the Torah. We mean that somehow it encapsulates the entire Torah, right? Ki dibur onoichi, and he says that the onoichi Hashem Alekecha, the first one of the 10 commandments, I am Hashem your God, koilel, includes kol ramach mitzvos esed. Actually includes all the positive commandments. In other words, every time we do a positive commandment, it's an expression of Anochi Hashem Alekecha. It's an expression of our belief in Hashem. Not just that the belief is a foundation of the mitzvah itself is a fulfillment of Anochi Hashem Alekecha. And the same thing with the commandment, you shall not have any other gods. Koilel kol shasa lo yisaseh. It includes all the 365 negative commandments. In other words, when I hold myself back from transgressing a negative commandment, what I'm really doing is I'm fulfilling the second commandment of La Yelecha. Again, it's a subtle difference. Not that just Anochi and La Yelecha are the foundation of the mitzvahs, they are actually the mitzvahs. Obviously, the mitzvahs need to be specified afterwards. That's why we have the other 611 mitzvahs. But they really encapsulate, they incorporate all the mitzvahs. Which explains the interesting thing. Therefore, right? Therefore, the Gemara tells us, Shomanu anoichi v'layilcha. We heard the 2 commandments, anoichi v'layilcha, levad mipi agvura. Only those 2 were heard directly from Hashem. As the Gemara says, the Gemara tells us that when the Torah was given, Hashem said the 10 commandments. Really, we only heard the first 2 from Hashem himself, and it was just too overwhelming. So we said Moshe Rabbeinu should teach us the rest, and Moshe Rabbeinu really communicated the rest of the Torah. By the way, that's why it says that the pasuk, famous pasuk, the Gemara in Makkah says Torah tziva lanu Moshe. Moshe Rabbeinu commanded us the Torah. What's the gematria of the word Torah? 611. Right? Because Moshe Rabbeinu taught us 611 mitzvahs. Because the first 2 we heard from Hashem. Yeah. But he says, what's the pshat? Pshat is because they're not just the foundation of the mitzvahs, they are the mitzvahs. So therefore, when Hashem said, Anochi L'Yilcha, that in itself encapsulated all 613 mitzvahs. Anochi, the positive commandments, L'Yilcha, the negative commandments, and we heard it all from Hashem. In other words, those 2. So the mitzvah of Emunah and the mitzvah against Avodah Zarah is really not the basis of the Torah, it's the Torah, it's the whole Torah. Which really the point is going to make towards the whole end of this whole journey, right? Which is that, therefore, if we are ready to overcome Avodah Zarah with Mesiras Nefesh, so we should be able to do that with every mitzvah. Because really it's all an expression of Emunah and Avodah Zarah. Right? Okay. Vayer Heitiv Inyan Zeh. So to really understand this idea properly, yeah, it was with me? Which means to understand how really every mitzvah is in others like this. Understand how Anochi and Oyelecha is an expression of every mitzvah, is the foundation of every mitzvah. That's simple. You don't need a long explanation, right? Obviously, the fact that we believe in one God, and He's the boss of the world, He's the authority, and that's the first 2 mitzvahs, then becomes the basis of everything else. Then if this God tells us to put on tefillin, or to wear tzitzis, or to light Shabbos candles, or not to eat treif, or whatever the case is, we understand, obviously, it comes from our emunah. That doesn't need explanation. What does need explanation is this concept that the emunah and avodah zarah is the expression of all the mitzvahs. It incorporates all the mitzvahs. That needs to be properly understood. Yeah? So what does he explain? It's like this. He's going to explain, and this is going to be the content of the next 2 chapters. It's going to be a very, very fundamental in in Chassidus is really the reason why Tanya was written, in a way. And that is to explain what actually does it mean, Anochi Hashem Elokecha. What does it mean, I'm Hashem your God? And what does it mean when we say in Shema Yisrael, right? That Hashem Echad. And then we'll understand why every mitzvah is really an expression of Emunah, and every Avera that we transgress is like an expression of serving Avodah Zarah. The Baal Shem Tov said an interesting thing, by the way. We say every day in Shema, right? We say, what's the beginning of the passage? 1 second. Baal Shem Tov had a very beautiful pshat of how he explained the passage. We say like this, Yishamru Lachem, we say in the second paragraph of Shema, right? Hashem warns us, he says, be careful. Pen yifte levavchem, in case your heart will be lured away. V'sartem, and you will turn astray. What will you do? V'avadatem elakim acher, you'll end up serving idols, right? Foreign gods. You'll bow down to them, and Hashem will be angry, and he'll stop the rain, and so on and so forth, right? That's what we say every day in the Shema. Hashem Tov translated a bit different, he says like this. Be careful, he says. Pen yifte levavchem, in case your heart will be lured away. V'sartem, and you will turn astray from Hashem. In any way, you might do an Aveira or something. You should know, says the Shema, that as soon as you have V'sartem, as soon as you turned away from Hashem, V'avaratem elakim acherim, you serve foreign gods. It's Avodah Zarah, right? Okay. So the Baal Shem Tov said that, and in what's common with Tanya, we'll come with the Alter Rebbe, and this is really what the Alter Rebbe did. Tanya is based on the Baal Shem Tov, right? I mean, the Shalom, the Baal Shem Tov, the Maral, etc. But the Alter Rebbe was a disciple of the Baal Shem Tov, and he really took, he wanted to explain the Torah of the Baal Shem Tov. That was his goal. But we know that one of the ways it was done through Chabad. In other words, the Baal Shem Tov said things very quickly, inspirationally, and he said the essence of the word, and you believed in the word, but it wasn't explained, right? That's the idea. The Baal Shem Tov generally was the idea to ignite emunah. And Alter Rebbe then brought the emunah into understanding, right? Same thing over here. In the Torah it works like that also. The Hashem said this, a quick word. He said that V'sartem, every time you turn away from the mitzvahs, Avaratem elakim acherim, like serving Avodah Zarah. The next few chapters, Alter Rebbe is going to explain why that. He said, like, what's the basis behind it, right? Okay. He says like Tzarich. He says what we have to do is like this. Tzarich lahazkir tchila miktzara. We have to mention, at least briefly, Inyan umahus, the idea and the concept, the essence of Achadusay Shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the oneness of Hashem. Right? A huge topic, and in fact, I think the Mittler Rebbe says that the entire Chassidus came for this. One of the major chidushim, one of the major revolutionary ideas that the Alter Rebbe developed, based on the Baal Shem Tov actually, right, is the pshat. What does it mean that Hashem is one? Right? What does it mean? It could mean many things. What do you think when you say Hashem Echad? What does it mean? One God. Yeah, okay, but that's actually a huge chiddush. You know that. That's comes from Alter Rebbe and the Baal Shem Tov. We have to understand what that means.
There's only one God.
Well, no, it's only one God, or one authority, or one source of blessing, or indivisible. Like the Rambam says that he's one. Yeah, he's the concept of oneness is indivisible. In other words, not like us that we have different parts to us, different emotions. Hashem is intrinsically one, right? The traditional pshat before Chassidus came along of Hashem Elokeinu and Hashem Echad was that he's the only authority in control, right? I mean, the very simple pshat is that there's one God. I mean, even before the Baal Shem Tov, they knew that wasn't the only thing, right? One God, what? That Yoshke isn't true. I mean, like we have to say Shema 5 times a day for that. Like, you know what I'm saying? Yeah. But it was more than that. Obviously, it was only one authority and one, like Rambam says, and one that there's no one else to turn to, no one else to daven to. Hashem is the ultimate and only source of everything that we have, right? He's the creator, that's everything that we have. Now, the Baal Shem Tov came along, again, very briefly, and brought a new pshat Imun Hashem Echad is, right? Which, by the way, is a very deep shot if you think about it, and it's really needs to be understood what it means. Now, just mention that the next two chapters of Tanya, the Alter Rebbe addresses this, but actually that's not the main area where the Alter Rebbe talks about this. The main part is the second part of Tanya. Shara Yichud V'Emunah. There's a whole section of Tanya, 12 chapters, where he deals with this issue, right? There are a couple of differences in the way he explains it here, the way he explains it there. We'll get to that, but that's the main part where he explains it. The first part of Tanya was more about the practical application of winning the war between the Nefesh Elokis and the Nefesh Abamis, right? Obviously they connected, and in fact, I think I once told you this. The Alter Rebbe actually he wrote originally that Shara Yichud V'Emunah should be the beginning, the first part of Tanya. We learn now should be the second part, and then he switched to for whatever reason. Okay, now the Baal Shem Tov revealed this wondrous, this amazing concept of Achdus Hashem, of oneness of Hashem, essentially in one sentence, like we said, that not only that Hashem is the only authority, not only is the only source of blessing, but is the only reality. Okay, it's the only reality. Now it was actually this concept is a little bit mentioned already before the Baal Shem Tov. It's mentioned in the Shalom HaKadosh. You know that in the very beginning of Tanya, Alter Rebbe says that Tanya is a collection of sayings, collection of concepts that he took from Sfarim Usoifrim. Sfarim means books and scholars, right? So the tradition amongst Hasidim is that when he talks about books, he's talking about the Maharal and the Shalom. The Maharal of Prague, who he came from, who wrote very deep books, but wrote them not so much in the style of Hasidus, more in the style of philosophy, whatever the case is. And the Shalom, who's the Shalom? The Shalom lived just before the Baal Shem Tov. The Shalom lived in the 16th century. He was born in 1558. He was called the Shalom HaKadosh, right? He wrote amazing. His name was Rabbi Shai HaLevi Horowitz. In fact, a lot of the people whose names are Gurevich today or Horowitz, they come from the Shalom and the Levim for that reason, because he was a Levi. He was born in Europe somewhere. He was born in, I'm not sure where exactly, Poland maybe. But eventually became his father was a Rav, he became a huge Rav. He traveled to Eretz Yisrael eventually for the last part of his life, and he's buried today in Tveria. He's buried right next to the Rambam actually, right? And he was a tremendous Makubal, tremendous Kabbalist, tremendous, very, very deep, very poetic. And part of Chassidus is based on what he says. And he already before the Baal Shem Tov says this idea, I'll read it to you. And he says the following. He says there's a pasuk we say every day in davening, at the end of Aleinu, at the end of the first part of Aleinu, and it says, V'yadaita hayom, you shall know today, V'ashavoyse elevavecha, and you should take to heart, Ki Hashem hu Elokim, that Hashem is Elokim, V'shamayim mimal, in the heavens above, al aras mitachas, and the earth below, ein oy, there's nothing else. So he says, V'ein pirusha, he says, it doesn't mean that there's no other God besides it. That's not what it means, right? But the pirush is, he says, and I'll read you the words, She'ein shum dover nimtza ki'im mitziusa. There's nothing really else that's found, nothing really else exists except for Hashem's reality. And therefore he gives life to everything else, and therefore v'lo yesh shum mitzius zulas mitziusa. There's no real mitzius, there's no real reality outside the reality of Hashem, right? And of course the Baal Shem Tov came later. The Baal Shem Tov, the Maharal came even before the Baal Shem Tov, before the Shalom, and Baal Shem Tov came after the Shalom. Shalom was between the Maharal and the Baal Shem Tov, right? Okay. So he says that this is the Chiddush, right? So the Baal Shem Tov said it more clearly, but briefly, and then the Alter Rebbe really, part of the whole purpose of writing Tanya was to bring out this idea, which is not often known, by the way. It's an important thing to bear in mind. This is really the foundation of Chassidus, and the foundational Chiddush of the Alter Rebbe. Achdus Hashem, right? Today we say these things very, very flippantly. There's only one Metzius, Hashem is everything is Hashem, whatever that means, right? But actually it was a revolutionary idea when it came about. It's not what Hashem Echad meant till Chassidus started elaborating on that, right? And it obviously brings a whole new dimension of serving Hashem. If that's the foundation of Chassidus, then obviously Hashem is the only reality worth pursuing. If he's the only thing that really exists, right? And that's the idea that world as an independent Metzius is nothing. It's insignificant. It's a weak and feeble existence, right? It only gets a real existence when we connect it to Hashem and becomes part of Hashem in a revealed way, which is the Torah mitzvahs, right? Now, when I say these words, by the way, that mean we'll explain as we go along. We say that the world is only one reality. It doesn't mean that the world is a God. Chas v'shalom, right? There was a philosopher, a heretic called Spinoza. That's what he said. Right? Let's not say this at all, right? I'm just mentioning it because the terminology can sometimes be confusing. It doesn't mean that the tree and the table is God. Chas v'shalom. It means that the tree and the table don't really exist. It's a manifestation as an independent thing. It's very, very different. Very different wording, right? Which we'll elaborate. We'll go into now. He says, interesting thing. He says like this. Before he's going to explain it, right, and explain how the world can be created, and yet there's the oneness of Hashem at the deepest level, is literally one reality. He brings a proof to what he's saying, because sometimes in Shema we refer to Hashem as Hashem Echad, right? But actually Hashem isn't only always called Echad. He's sometimes called, look at the next line, he says, Shenikra Yochid Umeyuchad. He's called Yochid, singular. What's the difference between Echad and Yochid?
There's one, there could be more.
Right. The word one can, that doesn't have to, and it doesn't in the Shema, but it can suggest that there's something else. Echad could be in one, but there could be two. The two could be less important maybe, but it's still two. Right? Now, we'll talk about later why in the Shema we use the word Echad. Because, and the simple reason for that is because the whole idea of Shema is that we have to bring the oneness of Hashem even into the world, even into our reality where there seems to be another thing, right? That's the whole idea of the word Echad. Echad means that Aleph, Ches, Dalet. Ches means the seven heavens and the earth. Dalet means the four directions of the earth and so on. And we say that all becomes part of the Aleph, which is Alufo Shel Olam, the master of the world, which is Hashem. Okay, right? In other words, even at the level where there appears to be something else, we say, no, not really, Echad. It's only one reality. Okay. But in truth, Hashem is Yachid, not Echad. Yachid means there is nothing else. That's it. Yachid. Right? For example, where do we see the word Echad? We just had it in Chumash. Vayerev vayiboker, Yom Echad. Hashem created the world. There was evening, there was morning. One day. Yom Echad. There was also a second day. Right? Because one day means first day. Echad, it's one day, but there could be another day, right? Yachid means something else. Yachid means there's only existence of Hashem. Another thing where we see this is obviously true, because he quotes something we said on Rosh Hashanah. You know that piyut we say after Masana Toikev, we say a whole bunch of sentences that begin with the word of Chol Ma'aminim. We all believe that Hashem is this, Hashem is that, and so on. One of them is V'chol Ma'aminim, right? Shehu levadohu, that he's alone. What does it mean he's alone? So he goes on to quote something we say every day in davening. Before Hashem created the world, was he completely alone? Yes. He was the only existence, right? We use that very expression for now. The word levadoi, when it comes to Hashem, is really a description of Hashem before the world was created. That he was levadoi, Yochid. It was only him. And then he created a world, and he's still levadoi. Right? What does that mean? It means that Hashem created the world, and the world didn't affect him at all. Right? It's exactly the same. Yeah. Hashem is exactly the same as it was before he created the world. What does that mean? Obviously, if the world was a significant existence, then it would be different. You can't say, take example by a person, right? If you accomplish something big, right? Important, significant. You can't tell me that you're the same before and after. You're not. Right? And that's what we say. We say in davening. Let's say, look, he says, like Moshe Omer, we say every day in davening, Atohu at shaloi nivra ha'olam. You are as you were before you created the world. Atohu mishenivra, you are after you created the world. We say this every day in davening before Hoidu. Pirush, which means mamash b'dishum shina. Hashem is unchanged. The world didn't make a dent. It didn't change him at all. All right. Kedichsiv, like there's another pasuk which says, Ani Hashem lo shanisi. It's a pasuk in Malachi, in the Nevi'im it says, Hashem says, I am Hashem, I have not changed. Now, the simple way that pasuk was always understood is that Hashem doesn't have changes. Like we have changes. Sometimes we're in a good mood, sometimes we're in a bad mood, sometimes we love, sometimes we hate. Hashem is constant. He doesn't have any change. Hashem who he is who he is, that's it. But on a deeper level, it means the deeper level of it, he says, Ki olam hazeh, this world, not just this world. V'chein kol ha'olam eselyonim, all the worlds above. Einam po'alim shum shinoi ba'achdusa yizbarach. They do not affect a change at all in the oneness of Hashem. B'hibara ma'ayin liyesh, even when they were created from nothing to something. Right? Shekamoi, Hashem remains exactly the same, only one reality. It's only Hashem. Shekamoi she'oyahu levadai. Just like Hashem was alone, which means Yochid u'meyuchad. He was Yochid, he was alone, he was singular. Koydem hibaram, before the world was created. Kein hu levadai, so too. He is alone, Yochid u'meyuchad, completely one and singular. Achash shabaram, after the world was created. Right? Very, very important foundation. Now, how come? How come Hashem is the same? I mean, He created a big world. So how can you say it's the same? Look at us. If we accomplish something big, we're not the same. We're different. Before we were someone without an accomplishment. Now we're someone with an accomplishment. I mean, how can you say that? The only way to say that is like this. And that comes to he starts to get into the crux of what's going on. He says Mishum, because we know Ka'ula Kamei Kalachoshiv, that this whole world, this entire existence, these worlds, the higher worlds, everything, before Hashem, they're worth absolutely nothing. Uka'ayin va'efes mamish. And they are like complete nothingness. Right? So this world is nothing. This world doesn't really exist. Now, we need to understand what that means, which we're going to explore later in much more greater depth. But we have to just... So let's just break this down a bit. First of all, if this world is like nothing, right, so then of course it doesn't affect the change. What affects the change in someone? If they create something real, something is worth nothing, right? I'll give you a little bit of a mashal, but I'll say later. Like when you do a mashal not always exact, but just so you get the point, right? If you achieve something big, someone gets a doctorate, he organized a big event, I don't know, whatever, right? Something that's really significant. So he's a changed person, now a person with a big accomplishment, right? How about if you just do something completely insignificant? I don't know, you move your foot. You changed? No, same person. Nothing really changed. I move my foot, a gesture, something. Huh? I instinctively, I don't know, scratch my arm. No, there's nothing. Why? Because it's an insignificant thing, right? So before we go any deeper, look at the world like that. The world is like a nothing. The whole big world of Shakir is like a... it's like such a nothing that it's so insignificant that it didn't change at all. Right? Now, we have to just establish something very important here. This chidush of Chassidus, this idea, this approach, that Achdus Hashem, the oneness of Hashem, means that there's only one reality, could lead a person to a big mistake. We need to understand this. Okay? Could lead a person to a mistake that the world doesn't exist then. The whole thing's like an illusion. If we say that Hashem is the only existence, that means we don't really exist. That's a fundamental mistake. Of course we exist. And there are two proofs to that. There's two proofs that we exist. Proof number one is that we know the Torah is a Torah of emes. Every word of the Torah is true. And the very beginning of the Torah is Bereshis bara Elokim Hashemayim v'Sa'aretz. Hashem created and heaven and earth. So there's a heaven, there's earth, right? It's true. It's a true existence. We have to marry up these two ideas in a minute, but it's a true existence, yeah? Second of all, if the world didn't exist, if just like it was our imagination that it exists, then it would belittle, it would diminish Torah mitzvahs. What is Torah mitzvahs? Torah mitzvahs Hashem wants, for example, you should take a piece of parchment that you should make a mezuzah, right? You should take a candle and light Shabbos candles. Which means you should take something that exists and do a mitzvah with it, right? If the world doesn't exist, so what's Torah mitzvah about? And we know that the whole point of Torah mitzvah is that the Torah that we do, you take a piece of parchment, you make a mezuzah, you change the parchment. You elevate the parchment. You reveal something in the parchment, right? If it doesn't exist, then what's it all worth? It's not a joke, right? So obviously the world exists. And the existence of the world is a true existence. But its whole existence is an existence of bittul, meaning, of course it exists, but it exists really, to us it looks like a big world, and to us it looks like a significant existence, and to us it looks like an existence which is independent. It looks like something that exists on its own merit, so to speak, right? When we say the world doesn't exist, we mean that nothing independent exists outside of Hashem's reality. That the independence, the yeshus, the egocentricity you see in the world, and the credence you give to the world, that's all nothing. It doesn't actually, that doesn't exist. The world, of course the table exists, but the table is, which when we understand it properly, we understand it by learning a lot of this idea, it's just an expression of Hashem's infinity. It's the expression of Hashem's ability. And as part of our job, by the way, part of our job is to negate the independence of the world and worldliness, for that matter, right? And to really only live our lives by Hashem, because the whole world is really only part of Hashem. Yeah. So in other words, what does it mean, Torah mitzvahs, basically, before we get to anything more? It means a big thing. It's not pshat that Hashem created the world, and the world exists. And then He told us that we should live in this world in a certain way. No. The whole world is only for Torah mitzvahs. The world is a way to fulfill Hashem's will. It's an expression of Hashem's desire. Right? But yeah, it's counterintuitive the way the world thinks, obviously. But that's what Hashem did. Hashem created an existence where that truth should be completely hidden. It's up to us to reveal that truth. Right? Part of revealing the truth, by the way, is it's a process of two things. It's a process, first of all, that's why Chassidus is full of this idea of being mevatel the world. Of always saying the world is nothing. Right? Because first you have to know that it's nothing. Then you can understand, so what is it then if it's nothing? Then you can say, actually it's part of the true existence. But first you have to, it's a big mistake people make sometimes. Like they say, no, Chassidus teaches us the world is beautiful, it's an expression of Hashem, it's Hashem's garden. Yeah, not the world that you're looking at. The true world is like that. So first you have to take away the veneer, you have to take off the clipper first. Which is why Chassidim traditionally always they were never into worldliness. They were always sort of trying to battle the world. They were always like diminishing the world, disrespecting world and worldliness. What the Friedrich Rebbe calls Weltlichkeit, worldliness. Because the world as a world is nothing. Unless you understand that what it really is. And that's what we do with Torah mitzvahs, that's what we do with living Hashem, serving Hashem and being that right. Really, Avraham Avinu already revealed this, but it wasn't clear until Baal Shem Tov came around. Right? So there's a story I once heard in Yeshiva. My father-in-law, when he used to bring, often would tell the story that there was two Chassidim, very great Chassidim, with Alter Rebbe. Alter Rebbe lived in Lyozhne, right? And one time, one of the Chassidim, he was like a farmer, and he was plowing the field, and he saw his friend traveling. He was traveling back from Lyozhne. He was traveling back from the Alter Rebbe. So he said to his friend, "Was Herzach in Lozhne? What's news in Lozhne?" Right? So he said, "Oh, Lozhne, big news. What's the news?" He said, "The Alter Rebbe said a word like this. Today the word is so well known. If you look at this, you come across the word a lot, but and it's not even we don't even see it as a chiddush anymore. But he said like this. It says that Avraham Avinu publicized God's name, and it says in the pasuk, because that was Avraham Avinu, he publicized monotheism, right? And it says, "Vayikra Avraham Hashem Hashem Keil Olam." Avraham Avinu proclaimed and he called the name of Hashem Keil Olam, the God of the world. But Alter Rebbe says, if you look carefully at the pasuk, it doesn't say the God of the world. God of the world would be Keil HaOlam, the God of the world. It doesn't say that. It says Kael Olam. Kael Olam, God world. Said the Alter Rebbe, because God's not the God of the world, God is the world. Meaning the world doesn't really exist. It's part of God's reality. Right? And, so the end of the story goes, when the farmer heard this, he threw down his plow and he said, that's the case, I'm going to the Rebbe now. I have to, such a vart, I have to go to the Rebbe. And he left, he went to the Yozhne to really absorb this idea. So later on, we'll come more to understand how we marry up these two things. The world, of course, exists, but doesn't really exist. In other words, it exists, but it's not independent existence, right? So I'll give you a little bit of an insight that's normally spoken about in the second part of Tanya. The second part of Tanya, the Alter Rebbe, one of the ways he does differently over here a little bit, but same idea. One of the ways he brings forth the idea that the world doesn't really exist is this, that he says, from the Baal Shem Tov, he says that every creation, the chair, the table, right, has a spark of Hashem that comes from the 10 utterances with which Hashem created the world that keeps it alive, right? It's not true that Hashem once created the world and it keeps going. It's not true. But Hashem has to recreate every second, right? And if Hashem, so to speak, would withdraw the utterance with which He creates the table, so whatever the utterance is, whatever one of the 10 utterances that keeps the table alive, if Hashem were to remove that spark of Hashem, right, that Devar Hashem, that we call the Devar Hashem, the spark of Hashem, the utterance of Hashem, from the table would simply cease to exist. Right? Now, later he explains why that is. He says because people often understand the creation of the world like they understand a smith that's making a candlestick. Right? So a smith takes a piece of silver and he makes a candlestick. And then the smith walks away and the candlestick still exists. Why? Because he didn't do anything. The silver was already there, the potential for the candlestick was already there. And he didn't do a chidush. He just took a piece of silver and he reshaped it into a beautiful design, but he didn't change the existence, so it's not a chidush, right? But for example, you see by Kriyas Yamsuf, when Hashem split the Red Sea, right? That Hashem blew a wind, it says, and that split the sea, and then the wind was blowing the entire night, right? Why? Because very simple, because there's a chidush. It always went against what the reality is. The reality is that water flows, and therefore Hashem changed the teva of the water, so to speak, but that He had prop it up until when He took away the wind, and when it came down to the sea again, right? And that's why there has to be this Dvar Hashem in the table the entire time, right? Therefore he says, so does the table really exist? He says, no, what's the essence of the table? What is the existence? It's the spark of Hashem. So what does it mean? There's no table? There's a table. So let me explain something that Rabbi Khan always used to explain. It's like this. One of the analogies that brought Chassidus to understand this is like this. The world has a nature, right? The nature is gravity. So when you throw a stone from a top building, it'll just keep going. And in theory, you go infinitely, right? Unless there was something blocking it. So when it hits the ground, so there's something blocking it, so the cell stops, right? Otherwise, we'll just keep going. However, what happens when you throw up a stone? Right? Which is against the way the world works. So the stone will keep going up as long as the force you put into the stone is propping it up to move it up. As soon as that force comes to an end, the basic physics, right? As soon as it comes to an end, the stone just naturally falls down, right? So like this. And it's the same thing. When Hashem created the world, there was only one existence. Hashem, there is only one existence. Hashem's existence, right? Creation of the world is a chidush. The world, there shouldn't be any existence really, other than Hashem. Hashem creates, He wants to create a world, so He created a world, but the world can only be propped up as long as the Dvar Hashem, as long as the spark of Hashem is in the world the entire time. Like the force in the stone. As soon as that Dvar Hashem is not there, boom, it falls across, right? Now, if you look at the stone, right? If you look at a bird, for example, a bird that flies, that's a natural thing to do, right? A bird flies, right? Would you call the bird a flying object? Yeah. A bird is a flying thing, right? If you look at the stone being thrown up, the stone is flying upwards, right? So there's two questions you can ask. Listen to this carefully, it's a deep thing. Is the stone flying? The answer is yes. Is it a flying stone? No. You get the difference? It is flying, but it's not a flying stone. A flying stone would mean that its nature itself is to fly, right? It's not a flying stone. It happens to be flying because the force in the stone, my force that I threw with my, what we call a koyach hazrika, the power to throw, is propping it up, so it's flying, right? Same thing with the world. Does the world exist? Yes. Is it an existence? No. That's the difference. Because existence is not independent at all. It's really an expression of Hashem's existence. That's just an idea, a bit of insight to get there. Of course, the world exists, but it's not independent existence. But before we get there, what he's going to do now in this parak, before he gets to like what is the bittul of the world, he's going to sort of explain to us how the world is really nothing. In other words, it's an insignificant existence completely. And he's going to give a mashal to explain that. And when we understand how the world is so bottled and so insignificant, therefore we understand why the oneness of Hashem is not changed from before the world and after the world. So he explains it like this. No, we're going to stop here. We're not going to have time to do this. We'll do it properly next week. But it's based on this idea. It's based on this idea I just said before. That how did Hashem create the world? He created the world with a Devar Hashem, through the idea of Dibur, right? The idea of speaking. In other words, of course, the ability, the strength to create a world is Hashem himself. But how did Hashem create a world? The world's a very diluted existence. In other words, Hashem used the idea of speech. We understand that, well, obviously not physical speech, but the concept of speech. We will understand how speech works with us. And then we'll understand what it means that Hashem used the power of speech to create the world. And therefore we'll also understand that since the whole force that's keeping the world alive is that speech of Hashem, and that speech even, as far in comparison to Hashem himself, is like insignificant, it's nothing, so we understand how the world is really nothing. Right? And that's he's going to explain at length next time. But we're going to go on to this different aspects of this chapter, next chapter, explaining this idea of the oneness of Hashem, how really the only true existence is Hashem. We explain it in different ways. All right, we'll stop there.